This is part 2 of our video series on subprograms, and in this part we're going to be looking at how do we create our own Delphi functions. In the previous video we looked at what a function is, and now we're going to look at how do we create our own function. So before we get into creating our own functions, let's just recap exactly how a function works. Okay, so let's take a function, for example, let's take the random range function. You might remember this. This will generate a random number for us. Now, we normally need two parameters for random range. You need an integer and a second integer. The first integer normally tells you the lower limit of the random number that you want to generate. And the second integer is the higher limit or the max number for the random number. So let's say we want a random number between 1 and 100, then we would use the random range function, and in brackets we would give it the information it needs, the two parameters, the 1 and the 100. And what it will do is it'll take those two values, it will send it to wherever the random range code is, and that code will calculate a random number and spit back or send back one integer. It sends back one value. Functions send back one answer. So you need to look at a subprogram as like a mini program where the parameters, the values that are coming in the brackets that are assigned there, those parameters are like input. They're information that the function needs in order to do its job. And then it will send back an answer. It'll always send back one answer. So random range in this case will send back an integer. Okay, does that make sense? Let's look at another example. Let's look at the copy function. If you remember copy, it takes in a string that we want to copy from. It takes in an integer. That's the number of the position that we want to start copying from. Maybe we want to start copying from character number 4. And then we take in another integer which tells us how many characters we want to copy. So for example, when we use the copy function in brackets, we send in the string that we want to copy from. Maybe it says the word hello. We want to copy from position 2 for 2 characters. Then it's going to copy the E from hello and the L from hello and send that back. So the copy function takes in the parameters, the stuff that's in brackets. That's the input for this function. We give it the information that it needs, and then it calculates the answer and sends back an answer in the form of a string. That's what the copy function sends back, and we store that somewhere. Okay, so that's how functions work. They're like mini machines that take in values as parameters. That's the information that it needs, and then it sends back an answer. Okay, so now that we've got an understanding of our functions that have already been designed in Delphi, we don't have to write the code for these functions. They've been designed for us. We can just use them. But maybe we want to create our own function. Okay, so how do we do that? There are 3 key steps when you're making functions. Okay, step number 1, we need to declare our function. Very similar to how you would declare a variable. We need to say, hey, we've got this variable. We declare what type it is so that it's ready to be used. So we have to declare our function. There's a whole set of sequences of things that you need to do when you declare a function, which we'll talk about next. After you've declared your function, then you actually need to write the code of that function. In other words, you need to tell the function what it needs to do. How does that machine, that little subprogram work? What does it need to do? Okay, so we write the code. And once you've done that, that function will exist, but it will do nothing. Why? Because we haven't used it. And that's where the third step comes in. Then in your normal program, your main program, you can then use that function. Think of it as creating, if you were building a table, for example, and you didn't have a saw, the declaring the function and writing the code would be an example of you creating the saw, making it. And then when you want to make the table, you can now use that saw in many ways. So that's the steps. We first declare the function, then we write the code, and then we use the function. So let's look at how we declare a function. So let's use an example. Let's say we're going to make a function called max3. Now, if you remember max, there is already a max function in Delphi that returns the biggest number of two numbers. We're going to make a max3, which I think you can guess will return the biggest number of three numbers. So what information does max3 need? Well, it needs the three numbers that we need to compare. So it needs three integers. So we're going to send max3, use max3. It's going to take in, that's the input, takes in three integers. So you can start visualizing. That's going to be the stuff that's in the brackets. Those are the parameters. And what is it going to spit back out? Well, its answer is going to be whichever of those three numbers is the biggest, and that's an integer. Okay. So we take in three integers. Max3 will then calculate which is the bigger of the three numbers, and it will spit out or send back an integer. Okay, so how do we declare that first? Well, let's look at the steps involved in declaring a function. Well, whenever you declare a function, you start with the word function. Okay, you'll notice it'll turn blue because it's a predefined word in Delphi. After that, you will then put the name of your function. You can call it whatever you want. Just try not to use a name that's already been used in Delphi or of a function that already exists, that type of thing. So try to stick to that for the beginning. Okay, so you write what you want to call your function. Then in brackets, you need to put down the parameters. You need to give your parameters what names they're going to be referred to in the function code, and you need to tell it what type of parameters it needs. Does it need a string and two integers? Does it need three integers? Does it need one integer and a boolean? I don't know. It depends on your function. But you need to specify, give them a name, give your parameters a name, and what type of parameters they need. And this is the key part. Remember I told you that the functions send back an answer, they spit back one result. You need to tell in the declaration what type of variable it's going to be spitting back. And you put a colon at the end, followed by what type of variable is being returned. Is it an integer? Is it a boolean? Is it a string? That's what you put at the end of your function declaration. So let's declare our max3 function. What do we start with? Well, we start with the word function. We're going to call our function max3. So there you can see the function name's max3. It needs three integers. So there you can see I've given them names A, B, and C. You can give them whatever names. You could have called them inum1, inum2, inum3 if you wanted to. But I've called mine A, B, and C. And I've said they are all three of those parameters are integers. Okay, so I've not only given my parameters names, but I've told the function what type of parameters they're going to be. And then at the end, I put a colon integer followed by a semicolon. That tells the program that when I use max3, it's going to be sending back an integer, which means I can't have a string is equal to max3 because it's not going to accept it unless I convert it. So max3 is returning an integer. Okay, are we happy with that? So let's get to the actual writing of this code. So here's a Delphi program. As you can see, I've got a little button here. We're going to use the max3 function in that button. So if I double click on the button, we get to the code where we would write what the button's going to do. So this, as you can see, is already a procedure. That's a button click procedure. And you'll notice at the top here, under type, you'll notice that that procedure has been declared. Do you see that? So that's where we can declare our functions and procedures. You can declare it over here at the top. You can declare it over here with the other functions and procedures. You can do that there. You could declare it under private or public as well. What that means is private means that your function can only be used in this unit. If it's public, if you put it under public, then if you have another unit that uses this unit one, then it will have access to the public procedures and functions that you create. So you can create it anywhere over there. I'm going to just put mine here for now so we can see. So here is our step one where we declare our function. Okay, so what did we say? We said we use the word function followed by the name of the function. We said we're going to call it max3. We're then going to give it three parameters. I said we're going to give it names, so let's call it A, B, and C. And what type of parameters are they? They are of type integer. And then what type of value is being sent back? Well, an integer is being sent back. So that's the return type. And then I put a semicolon. So there is my declaration. Function max3 ABC of type integer is the values going into the function, and answer of type integer is being sent back. Now, you'll see we need to write the code somewhere down here. Now, where do I do that? Well, you need to create a little space for you to write the code under implementation, but here's a little trick. Once you've declared your functions, I'm going to write it here, you can use control plus, I think it's shift, I must just double check, plus shift plus C. So once you've done your function, you declared it, press control shift C. And if you've declared it properly, do you see it creates this little block at the bottom where we can now write the code? Here is where we do our step 2 and we write the code for the function. In other words, what is this function going to do? So this is where we write the code. So it does it for us. Now, just a little tip, if by some chance you make a mistake with your function declaration and you make any changes over here, remember that you need to come over here and make changes to the heading of your place where you write your code as well. Okay, so what is our function doing? Now, here is the most difficult thing to conceptualize. You need to believe, although you haven't used it yet, you need to believe that there's going to be something in A, B, and C. We haven't used the function yet, so there's nothing, we don't know what's going to be in A, B, and C, but just believe that there will be something there. That's information coming in. Pretend that there's values in there already, and you need to send back the bigger of A, B, or C. Okay, so we don't need to declare other variables. Sometimes you could if you wanted to, but you don't need to get any other information from an edit control or input box. And you get it here. Here's where your input comes in for this function. What's the information need? I need those 3 numbers. There's nothing else I need. So the user is going to give me 3 numbers and I'm going to send back the biggest. Well, how do I do that code? Well, I'll go if A is bigger than B and A is bigger than C, because we're using the and, we need to put this in brackets. Okay, I know we don't know what's in A, B, and C, but just believe that there's values in there. So A, B, and C. So if A is bigger than B and A is bigger than C, then what is the bigger number? Well, A is the biggest number, so we want to send back A. Now, how do I send back a value? How do I send back that integer? Well, you have a variable that's already been declared for you. You can't see it, but it's there. Whenever you use a function, you can send your answer in the result variable. So I can simply say result equals A. So result equals, I put my final answer into a variable called result. I don't need to declare. You do not need to declare result. If you have in a function, the result variable is already there. You don't need to declare it. It's there. And it will be of whatever type that is. Okay. So result equals A. We send back the A. That's our output. This is our input. This is our calculation. We're sending our answer back to the result variable. Just believe that it's sending it back. Just believe that the value's in there. It will happen. Okay. Else, and we take that semicolon away there. If B is greater than A and B is greater than C, then our biggest number must be B. Is it not? So then we must send back the variable B. Where do we send it back? Using the result variable. So we will send back B. And if A is not the biggest number and B is not the biggest number, then it has to be C. So we will send back C. Okay. So you send your answer in a variable called result. It exists. You do not need to declare it. It's already there when you've got a function. Some textbooks, sometimes they use, instead of they using result, they use the name of the function. So they could say max3 is equal to A. So you could use that as well instead of result. I like to use result as a way that you always know that result is what you are sending back. Okay, so that is the writing of the code. So now I have declared my function and I've written the code of how that function is going to work, but it does nothing. Okay, the reason it does nothing because we haven't used it yet. If I run my program, you'll see it doesn't send back any values because all we've done is we've created this tool. Like I said with the table, we've created a saw. Just because you create a saw doesn't mean that the table exists. You've still got to use the saw to make the table. We just now have a saw that we can use. So let's use our new function that we've created. So over here, let's say I'm going to create 3 variables, num1, num2, and num3. And they're going to be of type integer. Let's give them some values. You could have used edit boxes and that, but let's give num1 an 11. num2 is a 15, and num3 is a 10. So straight away you can see that num2 is the bigger number. Okay. Now I need to use my max3 function, but max3 returns an answer. We need to store that somewhere. And then what type of variable does it return? It returns an integer. So let's create an integer variable for my answer. And I can now say our answer is equal to max3. Open bracket. Look what happens. It tells me what it needs. It tells me the type of variables it needs. It needs 3 integers. There's one called A, one called B, one called C. We don't have to have our variables called that. We could use our variables in its place. But we need 3 integers. So I can say num1, num2, and num3. In other words, send in an 11 in position 1, send in a 15 in position 2, send in a 10 in position 3. So when it uses the function, it will jump down to here. Let me just put a semicolon. When we call the function, it will take that 11 in num1 and it will then place it into A. So when in the function we use A, it's actually using the 11. And the B will actually be the 15 and the C will actually be the 10 because we've allocated values to it here. This is the information that's going in. That's the input. And when the result sends back an A, a B, or C, that result will then be stored in our answer. Okay. So now we've sent in 3 values. It's going to spit out an answer. Now I can just say show message. The biggest number is which one? Well, int to string, we're going to send through our answer. Because before the function is called, our answer will have nothing in it. But after it, we would have sent back a value and it will be stored in our answer, which we can now display. Let's see if it sends back the value 15. There it is, 15. And if I change 10 to a 17, now our num3 is a 17, so it should send back the biggest of the 3 variables, which is 17. And if I made the first one a 21, it will send back a 21. So there's our functions. We've got our declaration. Then we've got our step 2 where we write the code for our declaration. Remember, once you've declared it, you can press Ctrl-Shift-C to just get the place where you must write the code. And then our step 3, so in the document here, step 3 is we just use our function. Now you might ask yourself, why do we do this with subprograms? Why don't I just do this code over here? Because these are the benefits of subprograms. When you make a subprogram, if I want to find the max3 of another 3 numbers, I don't have to use this code. I can just call my function. I can use this mini tool that's been created for me. So I don't have to repeat this code every single time. I can just use the function. And what that means is it minimizes my code. My code gets a lot smaller. Anything that you are doing again and again and again, make a function from it. If it's returning a result, use a function. The other advantage is if something goes wrong with your function, if there's some error in your function, let's say there's a mistake here, then I only have to correct it over here. I don't have to go to every time I use this code. to correct anything that's wrong or make changes to it. I can just make changes or corrections here, and it will affect every time that that function is called. So it minimizes our code. It makes it a lot easier for us to do error checking and a lot easier to make changes to all the functions or to the code. Okay, so this has been an example of functions. In our next video, we'll actually do a couple more functions just to get our hands on how to do this type of thing. For more videos in this video series, you can go to our YouTube channel, go see all the videos over there, or you can subscribe. We would love to hear from you, so leave your comments, leave your likes, and you can go to our Facebook page and Twitter account to also find out whenever we post new videos. And remember, don't do it the long way. Do it the Mr. Long way.